The Happy Warrior Podcast, conservative commentary on the news of the day from a more positive perspective.
You're counting. Okay, welcome, viewers, one and all. And I mean the one. Thank you, whoever you are.
I got 3 on mine as well. So.
Okay, so that's 4. Welcome. Thank you for meeting us here today. My name is Peter Pischke. This is episode 2 of The Happy Warrior. I'm here with my pal and producer, Robert Melling, over there. He had to put on an extra hat today because we are live streaming this, just like all the cool kids in town seem to do these days. Today I have with us the exciting State Senator, correct?
That is
State
right.
Senator.
But he's
Neal
also
Tapio.
exciting. I mean, I try to keep things exciting.
See, I don't know with the state senator if you say the senator or not. I don't know if that's appropriate.
I'm not a politician, so...
Okay. If you were like state house, I have no idea what to call it.
Representative.
State congressman, state representative.
Yeah, representative.
Okay.
Right. Moniker, I guess.
Well, thank you for taking your time to be here with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
This is a people can't see this, but this is a high-powered studio.
I think it's very, very impressive.
Yep, I like it.
We've had all kinds here. We've had mayors here. We've had city councilors. We've had politicians. We've had comedians and magicians and comic book artists and all kinds of interesting people.
Perfect.
So, no, good stuff happens here. So some of you may be familiar with Neal, for good and bad. I think he's a rather nice fellow, at least as a person. We'll have to see if we agree with his politics totally or not, but I think Neal as a person is very nice. I saw you at the forum last month where it was you and Chantal Krebs, who is also running. So you're running for the GOP nomination spot to run for U.S. House.
That's correct. Yep, in the Republican primary, June 5th. And so anybody can re-register right now. If there's independents or Democrats, they'll have to re-register as a Republican to vote for me. I would imagine we'll have quite a groundswell of people wanting to do that.
Yeah, no, I hope a lot of people are paying attention. It's important that we get people to vote and pay attention to these things, including our primaries. We just came out of, on April 10th, we had the lowest voter turnout here in Sioux Falls in 25 years. So I know very personally the value of people coming and voting and paying attention. No, but I was going to say, at that forum, I thought you were fine. You did great against Krebs. Afterwards, they let they usually let the candidates speak to the people if you want. And you were very genuine with me. You did answer my questions I had. I was very impressed with that. I mean, I don't know a Chantal Krebs that well, so take it with a large grain of salt, but she wasn't as willing to engage in discussion or questions. She was very much on the ball on her talking points and verbiage. But you were very open with me, and I was very impressed. I thought that the person you were putting forward was way different than anything I had read about you. And so I thought, I might as well see, maybe, just maybe, your voice back in my head, maybe Neal would be willing to come on my friend's podcast, which eventually turned into this podcast.
No, I'm not a politician. I'm just a concerned citizen, a business owner, and kind of a Christian conservative. I'm concerned about the direction of our country, and I do happen to follow politics, but I don't use talking points. I basically tell people what I think, and I think people are ready for that. Whether they agree or disagree, I think that we have to have a dialogue these days as opposed to using talking points. That doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, I guess I would say this week was kind of a weird one for me, but I was helping a friend, Tom Pischke, who is running again for re-election for State House, and he was actually handing out Tapio cards, business cards, when he was knocking doors. Mm-hmm. So I inadvertently did help you
Oh, nice.
Not on purpose, but you should know that he thought that he thought of the three that you were the best. So I would say that take as high praise from Tom. But
Tom's also not a politician.
No,
he's a concerned citizen that wants to try to change some things that are really askew in the legal system.
Tom's really big on
genuine.
The issue of shared parenting. If you ask Tom what he's about, he likes to talk about that.
Yep.
But all right, I have my set. I tried. So when we were putting this together, we wanted this to be open and forthright and honest. Robert always does this normally. He treats people very well in this podcast, and so I've tried to emulate on it. I've run for local office twice, lost twice, but I can understand the value of when you're being interviewed, that you're taken seriously and you're treated fairly. No one wants to. I know it's kind of exciting to watch on Fox News or MSNBC to watch talking heads yell at each other and kind of like talk past one another. But I mean, in real life, that is no fun whatsoever, and I'm not really sure it's all that constructive. So the interview, we provided Mr. Tapio with basically an outline of the questions we're planning to ask or may ask. This is a conservative-leaning podcast, so this is coming from a conservative journalist and his producer. Those who are watching them may be more journalistically inclined, maybe our friends at the Argus or at KLO. Just know that's where we're coming from in this. So Neal, I should probably have opened this, but Neal is infamous on the internet, which is a special thing to be. A lot of people try to be infamous on the internet. That's their goal. They're like, I can either be a nobody or no one, or I can be infamous on the internet. I don't know if that means anything to you, but there's some people out there that would love it. And so you came out, I think I first heard of you was back in December when they had announced, when Lutheran Social Services had put out this thing about Interfaith Day. And there was an article, here, I'll just put this out. It says here, the article I have, for example, I thought this one was kind of colorful, was from the Daily Beast. It said, here meet the bigoted mini-Trump of South Dakota. It talks about in here about if you want to be successful in GOP politics in South Dakota, that you have to be as anti-Muslim as you can be. They go later in here, they call you the LeBron James of anti-Muslim hate. It kind of goes on from there. I thought it's kind of funny. I read this one. I read another one from Daily Coast that stick out. It's pretty exciting. I don't know if if I'm not you, so I don't know how I'd emotionally feel about that. But it's almost, if that was me, I'd almost find it an honor that I elicited so much heat.
So after that came out, I put out a press release thanking them for their endorsement, as well as Argus Leader, and I think Daily Coast picked it up, and or is it Daily Cause? I can't.
I think it's
Coast.
Coast. If I had to take a guess, yeah.
Yeah. So just the interfaith issue. One of the issues that I'm very concerned about is Islamic terrorism, and many of my friends are in the military. I have one friend that's 19 years in the military, spent 4 or 5 years of his life over in the Middle East. And we keep fighting an endless war on terror. And I'm pretty concerned about that. I don't see an end in sight. And if you're going to ask people to go and give their lives or their limbs and up for a war, you should clearly define who your enemy is. And then clearly define your objectives and how you plan on winning that war. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you're 17 years into a war that we're no closer than when we started. We're actually further away.
I think
becomes a concern.
No, I hear you. I think that is what that's what I don't get most about these articles, particularly from the far left, is actually on this issue. They actually share a lot of ground with you, and I don't think they're willing to engage intellectually to to talk about, because you're saying that we've been in this endless war, or we've been in this war long enough, so now it's time to leave. I remember back when President Obama ran the first time that was the strong mantra, let's get out of the war, and that you see that still on both sides of the aisle. I think a lot of libertarians do it. I know people on the left often bring it up. I mean, so I was kind of surprised when you talked about the forum, that, that is something that actually they might be able to find agreement in. I think and we can get in this later, more about what are their particular frustrations with you. So let's talk about your background.
Sure.
Let's do a quick biography of the man that is Neal Tapio.
All right. Well, primarily, I'm a small business owner and entrepreneur, and my entire family, on both sides of my mom and my father's side, are small business people, self-employed people, and my dad was a Lutheran minister, and he was part-time, so he had a full-time job selling agricultural feed and seed corn, and he also pastored a church of about 100 people. And so he worked 80 or 90 hours a week, and as a part of his responsibility of giving back, as well as many of my relatives are just strong believers in the American dream, the American way of life. That my dad grew up in a home with 11 kids in basically a 3-room house, and complete abject poverty. And out of that came a very successful next generation of people that it wasn't easy, but they worked hard and they sacrificed and they lived with thrift, and sometimes it drove us up a wall having to live underneath such tight financial constraints. But at the end of the day, it's the right way to do it. You have to live within your means. You have to work hard and you work long hours, but you become self-reliant, and then out of that comes some, once you're self-reliant, then you're able to help other people. That's kind of where I come from. So I have an entrepreneurial background as well as kind of a Christian conservative background. And I think that's the proper way of governing, is to have a smaller government that helps people and encourages people to provide for themselves, and that's our job.
So now, is it Watertown that you're from?
Yep, Watertown.
Watertown. Okay, that's what I thought. And you even have a brother currently in agriculture, don't you?
Sure. Yep. One of my brothers married into a family. They're family farmers, and from the Mitchell area, and so I'm very close to the ag community.
So if I have this, I was reading the very fact-oriented Wikipedia for part of this biography, but it says it's about, was it 1988 is when you graduated? Was it college or high school? High school, and then you went to go work for Senator Larry Pressler. Yeah, I actually.
Oh, no kidding.
Yep. So I worked out in Washington, D.C. right out of college. That was my first job. I had an internship, and then I was full-time. I had the most important, well, at least Senator Pressler said that I had the most important job in the office, which was opening the mail and distributing the mail and making sure that the mail got answered. But it was a very important learning lesson. People would send in 300 letters, or there was 300 letters a day that you'd read and understand, and we would compose a draft back and send them back a letter. And you learned what everybody's areas of issues were. So Social Security, healthcare issues, to transportation, to agriculture. It was just a very good learning experience.
And I felt inspired last night. He says, you know what, I'm going to contact Mr. Pressler and see if he'd like to share anything. The email I got from him was, I wanted to make sure that I'm not endorsing any of the 3 candidates, but he says I consider Neal Tapio a friend. He says, Neal Tapio, okay, so I'm quoting from the email he sent back. He says, Neal Tapio did work for us, did an excellent job on all tasks we assigned him. I do consider him a friend. And he said he didn't think that that he has not requested, nor probably would he want my endorsement, but I'm friends with all the candidates and wish them all, including Neal.
Well, Senator, so I had a unique experience in that they had a home, and I was able to stay in the basement of his home for the first 2 or 3 months. And so I was
Wow.
able to see exactly the life of a senator. I was 19 years old, or 21 years old, extraordinarily naive from a small town in South Dakota. And him and his wife, Harriet, she went out of her way to make sure that I was taken care of and was included in many of their events that they would have. But it gave me a first row seat to political power. One of the things about Senator Pressler that I think you'd find interesting is that he had what's called the Pressler Amendment, which was probably one of couldn't be bribed. If you remember Abscam or
when they did, the story is, you guys don't know, is that the FBI had a lead, and this is how they got Senator Murtha, was they said, okay, we'll test these senators and congressmen and offer them a bribe of money. And Pressler was the one, they said, of all of them, that he was the one that absolutely would refuse the
I could do by Pressler invitation, but he went, I don't think that would be appropriate. And he just the core conviction was that it was something that he didn't think was appropriate to as they were offering him money to vote a certain way. But the Pressler Amendment was an interesting deal where he refused to sell F-16 fighters to Pakistan, which kind of fits into this the discussion that we're having right now of the war in Islamic countries, Pakistan being one of the Islamic countries. So when you do talk to him, it would be a very fascinating question to explore of why he was so adamant about not selling, fighter planes to Pakistan. But so anyway, it was a great experience. I learned a lot, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity.
Okay, so your biography says, okay, the next thing they has is that you tried to help someone else run, and then you did something else, sort of politics related. This is 2002, and then you ended up doing business. I know you did a couple of ventures. I think one was that you sold industrial washers. I think another one was that you said you helped build a set of houses out here in Sioux Falls in a neighborhood. I remember an interesting moment that left me. You said that you felt the 2008 recession when wasn't a crash, but whatever you want to call it, that you felt that one keenly. Do you want to talk a little bit about your business life in between?
Yeah, well, I'll just go through the full, just give you a quick thumbnail. But after Senator Pressler, I worked for the Republican Senatorial Committee for one election cycle and did opposition research. I moved back to South Dakota. I worked for Wells Fargo Financial, which is a finance company that financed basically furniture loans. After that, I moved to Sioux Falls. I lived in Rapid City briefly and moved to Sioux Falls, and I worked for a credit card company called Dial Bank. And I got fired from Dial Bank because I was late to work, and then I was heading out early. I had to be somewhere at 5 o'clock, so I left a little bit early, and my boss said, "Hey, where are you going?" And I said, "I got to get out of here. I don't want to be late twice in the same day." And so that wasn't, you don't want to necessarily say that. So
especially here in the Midwest, they take tardiness and being on time very seriously.
You have, and what I learned was that you have to love your job. If you don't love your job, you're not going to put a whole bunch of your energy into it. And I didn't necessarily like my job, and so I kind of got up my feet. I found a sales position where I actually started to excel. And my first week of time in sales on 100% commission basis, I actually almost doubled my income from the previous month's work at the bank. And once I realized that you can actually have a income based on your performance as opposed to based on just showing up or that you interviewed really well, I really started enjoying life. And so I've been in sales on and off my entire life. So I sold industrial cleaning equipment, what's called an automatic parts washer, to car dealerships, implement dealerships, small Don's repair shop or Joe's repair shop, all the way up to, and I still do that to this day, but I sell to Fortune 50 companies, so Schlumberger and Baker Hughes and Halliburton, and I ship equipment that ranges from $10,000 all the way up to $1 million. I ship it all around the world. So, and I used every little bit of information along the way in the position that I have now. So when I worked at Wells Fargo Financial, I hated the job because I charged 39% interest rates to people, and I thought it was immoral. But I learned how to sell in that job, and I learned how to sell money. So if you wanted something for $10,000, I learned that, hey, it's only $250 a month for 5 years. You can afford that, right? And so when I learned how to sell and finance the equipment, now I have a sales and leasing company where I sell payments on $1 million. So if people say, oh, I can't afford $1 million, I tell you, but you can probably afford $5,000 a month, couldn't you? And all of a sudden, you can reduce people's value down to a workable amount, and I became quite proficient at that. So I was in sales for quite a while. The downfall to sales is that you travel a lot. So many months or many years I would spend 100 to 180 days in a hotel room. I've traveled pretty much and sold from New York, Pennsylvania to California, from North Dakota to Texas, all around to Saudi Arabia to Oman. So I sell that equipment. In between there, I built spec homes in Sioux Falls, and like I was telling you, a larger number of people in my family are self-employed business people, contractors, general contractors. So I built 30 homes here in Sioux Falls and invested my own money, did a lot of the work myself. I hired a lot of subcontractors, negotiated a lot of all of the contracts, and then ended up selling them. And I ended up in 2008 with about $1.5 million worth of homes, and they shut down the jumbo loan program where there were no buyers. And so when you watch the market collapse, I was selling $425,000 homes, and you couldn't find a buyer. And so I sat and wrote $12,500 payments for I think a year and a half straight.
Wow, that would be like the worst. That'd be not a good time to be in the home business.
It was horrible. I learned how to gain 30 pounds in a year. You do that.
I'm pretty good at that.
You are too?
I can do that. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, there's some bad times. I mean, that's what life is all about. Is you have good times, you have bad times, and you try to learn from your mistakes and always have kind of an idea that things are going to get better.
Now, what pulled you back into politics? Was it okay? So you were on. So my understanding, if you allow me to be real quick, was that you heard the Trump campaign stuff. You got interested in Trump, so you went Trump, and it was from that you eventually, after working with Trump, you ran for state senate, or do I have those backwards? Is it state senate and then the Trump campaign stuff?
Yeah, so I had kind of given up. So I started, after I lost all the money into in housing, I kind of lost about $500,000, and I ended up with about $3,000 in my bank account. Just briefly, I for a year, I worked for Growth Energy, which is an ethanol trade association, and I helped them set up memberships with 160 co-op or farmer-owned ethanol plants around the country. I think we together raised $3 or $4 million for that. And then I left and I started back selling up into the Bakken oil field. And so I started working 80 hours a week and selling up there. And
how long did you work in the oil industry?
So end of 2010 until now, I still do. That's really what my profession is right now. And the oil industry went from average price of $25 a barrel, went all the way up to $140 a barrel. And in 2014, it crashed back down to $25 or even lower. And so business just shut off. Nobody was buying anything. And I'd seen a lot of bubbles. I saw the bubble in 2008, and I was frustrated that politicians didn't even know what a mortgage-backed security was, or a collateralized debt obligation was, or a ninja loan. And we created incentives in programs that were really were negative. They were actually creating perverse incentives for people not to pay their loans back or to take excessive risk without
with no way that they would ever be able to pay it back.
We couldn't contain it, right? And so I saw that, and I saw the exact same thing happen up in North Dakota, where we were creating a bubble mentality. This time I went through it, and I knew what a bubble was, and so I protected myself by not actually leasing my equipment, but doing a kind of a rental program where they would be able to rent it, but I always had ownership of all of my equipment. And so when things went bad, and I think 11 or 15 companies filed bankruptcy, I never lost one dime because I had written my contracts based on my experience from before. So when everything went south, I've always been frustrated that politicians aren't sophisticated enough to see. They don't have enough background on business and entrepreneurship, and I always wanted to kind of get involved. And Donald Trump came along and started saying that I've always been an outsider, even when I worked for Senator Pressler. I've always been an outsider that thought the system was broken, that politicians are controlled by fear. They're not controlled by wise risk taking, or basically you've heard of big companies, they're all yes men. Well, that's what ends up happening in government, is everybody's a yes man. They are covering your own butt, right?
Yeah, I get what
that's what you get. I just have a different perspective. I said we should be able to have business people that make decisions, good decisions, and create a fair and level playing field for all. Donald Trump got involved. I recognized that he was going to win very early because it was a message that was right for the times, and I share that message.
So what year, like what month and what year, what were you there?
Probably
was this before the Iowa caucus?
Yeah, so it was before the Iowa caucus. So wow. I think long before. When I became a Trump fan, I immediately knew when he announced that he was going to be formidable, and there was a very good chance that he would win. And I knew that because I'd go up and I would talk to all these people in the oil industry, and I'd sit in these big factories that were the size of football fields, and they were almost empty. There'd be 5 or 6 or 8 people sitting there, and I would do some small talk, and there'd be a lull in the conversation. I'd say, well, thank God for Trump. And these guys, these big guys, muscle men with tattoos on their neck and ear stretchers, and these were just Goliath of men, and they'd all say, yep, we're voting for Trump, he's the savior. And I said, really? And I'd go to the next place, and the same thing. These guys, Trump's going to do it. And I'd go into the regional managers of the Western region meetings, and the same thing would happen. These guys were all Trump fans, and I'd travel a lot. I would call on 10,000 people a year. My customer base is thousands of people. They were all Trump fans, and I started realizing that this election was about all of the failed policies of the liberal
the Obama
administration for the last, and it was separating people that wanted to get up in the morning and produce something of value from the people that were going to get something from government. And all of the factory workers and the union workers and the police and the fighters, those were all former Democrats. They were rushing into the Trump Republican Party.
Yeah, no, I mean, not belittling your commitment or your decision, but I'm saying if I had to look at this objectively as a political risk taker, political gamble, I mean, you really won out. I mean, no one, I think, hardly took Trump as seriously as he did for a long time. I mean, past the Iowa caucuses.
Yeah, I'm a political news junkie, and it totally blindsided me. I was like, no way. And then when it was down to like him and one other person, I was like, okay, this is happening.
Yeah, this is a thing.
Isn't that we should explore that. I was in a field with a lot of blue collar workers. The majority of the people, I sell a tool that mechanics and just laborers use, right? And all of those people were being energized to want to get involved in politics for the first time, really, that I've ever seen. And so I recognized that very early. But a lot of people that were in kind of Sioux Falls, the downtown areas are connected to they missed that little wave.
Well, even just like following the national media, because it's like I watch, I'll have like a screen with CNN over there and Fox over there at the same time with the sound off while I'm programming, and and I read a lot of political blogs on both sides, and I did not see it coming at all.
I mean, I think you were right that Trump, for whatever reason, seemed to best tap into the frustration that a lot of people were feeling. I know in my own family that the frustrations, there's this feeling that in America, and Americans have a very strong sense of fairness, that if you're hardworking and you give all that you can give, that the results of that should turn out well. And I think a lot of people were feeling with unemployment, with how our entitlement programs are right now, that just things weren't fair. And I think Trump tapped into that. I mean, this is me more speaking the interview, but I think Trump did well to really tap into that frustration and feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. He tapped into and people misunderstand Trump, is that he didn't create the movement. There was a movement already going on, and he's a result of all the problems that have happened in politics. When you end up with trillion-dollar deficits as a standard operating, you're going to have anger and you're going to have conflict all over the place. He lives in that area, right? He does his own press releases or public relations on the radio, as whatever, Danielson or what. He is an incredibly well-qualified candidate for this time. The people that are frustrated, he's their representative. It's that.
I think you were right in your analysis. Now, so that was pretty neat getting to work with now President Trump and Vice President Pence. What was it like? You were the SD campaign manager of the Trump campaign, which, I mean, not to belittle. I mean, especially once it got past the primary season. I mean, that was South Dakota. I would have to expect an awful lot to happen if South Dakota had any chance of going blue.
There wasn't a chance.
But you did work on and I had to read a couple news stories to find this, but you did work in Colorado, that you were up there helping out.
That's right. So the purpose of training you in South Dakota was to, making sure that you could get a large volunteer network of people that would be helping phone calling in different battleground states. That was one of the largest parts of my job, was to make sure that I had people in every area that were willing to man the phones, and so we would be calling into battleground states. And then as the election became closer, within a month and a half, then I moved to northern Colorado, and I helped other state directors run volunteer teams, work events. I think President Trump came 2 or 3 times to northern Colorado. I helped work an event in North Sioux City, or Sioux City, Iowa, I guess, and that was the really interesting experiences, was to watch how these events would happen. He announced my first, when I went to Colorado, he announced 36 hours before an event in Loveland, Colorado, and he filled an auditorium of 15,000 people, and there were 15,000 people waiting outside.
Wow.
That's rock star status. And people would say Hillary Clinton. At that same time, they were saying Hillary Clinton was up by 12 points. And if you look at my Facebook page, you'll read that I said, I don't see how she's up. Because I've been involved in politics for 25 years. I have never seen anybody fill a stadium and get 30,000 people. Where does that happen, right?
Yeah.
And so I was seeing something entirely different.
No, it hasn't happened in a long time.
And it probably won't be duplicated, because he's a rock star. He's a person that he's a public figure and a personality that was also tapping into resonating with an entirely different group of people. Another thing that people have to understand is these weren't traditional Republicans going to these events. I went to the rally down in Iowa, and beside me in the VIP section, I was kind of organizing that. There were union workers, there was a Purple Heart recipient, there was a Gold Star mother, there was some pipe fitters. These were these were not people that go to the Lincoln Day dinner, the Republican Lincoln Day dinner. These were hardcore, rough-looking, just red-blooded Americans. And that was the movement, and that's what was missed on all of these CNBC or MSNBC.
No. The best of the best missed it. I mean, the people the 538, I think, is often thought of as the top of the game right now, and what especially was then, and they completely missed it.
Yeah.
So
here's another interesting. I worked one event, and I had a volunteer out in Colorado, and she was a 5 foot, maybe 1 inch Mexican lady. She was about 50, 55 years old. And the first time I met her, she was making phone calls, and she says, I am going to pray over President Trump. And I said, wow, that's ambitious. And she says, yeah, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to pray over him. And sure enough, we had a call center that was all set up. And there was, and I was able to get her into that call center, and she stood up in the middle of the event and said, Mr. Trump, would it be okay if I came forward and prayed over you? And all of a sudden, a bunch of people came over with this 5'1" Mexican. Tears are flowing all over the place as she's praying over him, and it's a side of President Trump that people don't know, is that he was incredibly humbled by that experience. And it's those type of little things that you kind of see the character of a person, where, right now you got some horrible stories that are tough, I'm sure, for his wife and son, but there's very intimate times in that campaign where you'd see the humanity of President Trump. It was quite interesting to watch.
Well, no, thank you for sharing that. I'm really glad that we got to share that story. That isn't something I've heard before. Especially not that side of our commander-in-chief. All right, so I need to move this interview forward. Sorry.
45 minutes in.
I know.
I told you we wouldn't get to too many of those issues, but...
No, I think it's good. I think we brought up some stuff that other people have. But, okay, so with your experience in politics, I mean, okay, so I guess the question everyone asks, and this is actually probably what they said of President Trump. They did ask this President Trump, is how sincere was President Trump when President Trump said X or asked, or and I'm just asking this as respectfully as I can. I mean, when you said about the Interfaith Day that this was overtly political, which in some ways it was. LSS, Lutheran Social Services, does charity work, and they're very much about social services, but they do also hop into politics from time to time. And there were some more political groups, but there are also a lot of religious groups. I mean, with your political background, I mean, some people would say, Neal, you should have known better to say, X or Y.
Well, in particular to the interfaith group, I'm an observer of politics, and I believe that there's an assault on Christian values and a Christian family. And then you look at who's doing the assaulting. So there's an LGBT community that is pushing their agenda. Right or wrong, it's their agenda that they're pushing. That agenda collides with the Christian family or Christian value agenda. James Dobson was labeled in his group, Family Heritage Alliance, was labeled a Christian hate organization because he defended traditional marriage, right? Okay, the organizations that did that were the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center,
Poverty
right?
Law Center.
Okay.
There's not a political controversy.
The same people that are pushing that agenda were the same people in the interfaith movement, or a large numbers of them. The ACLU girl was standing right there, and the person that contacts the Southern Poverty Law Center was sitting beside me. There is an agenda that people have. That's what's going. My dad was a Lutheran minister. In the Lutheran Church, there's a division going on in the Lutheran Church, and it's being divided by this a belief that there are that we should have gay marriage, that we should have gay clergy, that we should have gay adoption.
Very progressive
and that's
society.
A very progressive. And that's divided the church. Okay, that's a political movement. That is not a part of a specific traditional Christian faith-based movement, right? So they're pushing an agenda, a political agenda. They're also saying that we need to have diversity, that we need to accept everybody. And what my point is that, well, just because you have a different viewpoint doesn't mean that it is equal in value to another viewpoint. So if one person believes that they should be able to have sex with a 4-year-old, and another person says, well, no, I think that you should be 2 consenting adults, those are not equal, right?
I get what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying, is that in the interfaith, we're saying that we should accept everybody. My point is that we are fighting a war on Islamic terrorism, and we need to understand the root of terrorism. When people say that terror has nothing to do with Islam, yet all the terror organizations are fighting in the name of Allah. They go by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, Al-Nusra, Hamas, Hezbollah. These are fighting in the name of
the
Islam.
who's of terrorist groups,
right?
yeah.
And so if people object to me calling it Islamic terrorism, which was my only resolution was, at the end, was we support President Trump for his fight against radical Islamic terrorism. And what the people in the interfaith group had, was that they didn't want to label that Islamic. They came to me and says, if you take out Islamic, we'll let that pass. And I said, no, the point of it is to point out that it's important to point out to the people fighting in the military who you're fighting. We're fighting people that are fighting in the name of their religion. And if we don't recognize that, we have a problem. They're pushing that agenda, and so that makes them a political organization. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Okay. So
does that make sense?
Yeah. Let's just back it up a little bit. Okay. So I get what some of you are saying. I think some of your problems, to be frank, is that a lot of people, especially in the United States and elsewhere in the Western world, like to use a lot of disclaimers before they talk about subject. You don't seem to be one that says that. So they say a disclaimer would be, it says, I think. So we're going to talk about the issue of home. And I'm not saying this is what you're talking about. You're saying we're going to talk about the issue of same-sex marriage. He says, I think that people who are gay or lesbian are very nice people and blah, blah, blah. They're very nice and say, but I disagree on, for example, Iowa having the a federal judge decide on the issue of same-sex marriage or not. But they have that disclaimer, and that disclaimer to some Americans is very important. You don't seem to use any. When they hear, you talk about Christian values, so the first thing they want to ask me is, well, does that mean that he only wants Christians? He doesn't like Jews, and he doesn't like, your progressive Muslim, and he doesn't like X? I mean, so help me out here. Is this just your background speaking, or do you really feel that it's Christian only? Because I would say American, when you say Christian values, I think like traditional American Judeo-Christian values. Mm-hmm. Do you get what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, and I. These are we could have a full podcast just on this conversation about the history of Christianity or Western Judeo-Christian values or, Western Christendom. Because there is a separate culture of Western Judeo-Christian values, right? And that is separate from Eastern religion values or whatever. But when you understand where we came from and where we believe freedom comes from is completely unique. The idea that God gives us complete freedom and that we have the freedom to believe or not to believe, to express ourselves, the freedom of the press, those aren't guaranteed by our Constitution, right? Those aren't given to us by the Constitution. We recognize as Western Judeo-Christian values or Christian values that those are given to us by God. Inalienable rights. Okay.
Yep.
When we start there, that comes out of really just Christian. It comes out of the Protestant Revolution. The idea that Martin Luther actually posted the 95 Thesis and said, we don't have to go through an intercessory to talk to God, that God gives us the right to talk back to Him. That's quite an amazing change,
it is.
Right?
It's the Great Leap Forward, or whatever the name of that book is. I can't think of. And so 2,000 Year Leap. There you go. Yes, 2,000 Year Leap.
But it's we have to have a longer discussion of where we go. If you've heard me speak, I don't know if you've heard me speak, but I've given half-hour speeches from where freedom comes from at the very beginning of Cicero and Socrates, of Western Judea, or just Western thought, all the way through the Dark Ages and how we kind of lost it, how we got mixed up into a theology where you were forced to believe as the church taught, and if you didn't, you would be declared a heretic. And then out of that struggle, Martin Luther, the Protestant Revolution, we fought bloody wars. We fought a 30 Years' War where 9 million people lost their lives to get away from this idea that they had that church and state were combined. Okay, we fought to get rid of that. When we moved, and so out of that comes the Enlightenment in France, where you had a renaissance of arts. And then in the United States, at the exact same time, you had a political renaissance. This idea that you could encapsulate in a written document a form of self-government that allowed us to have complete, total freedom, that it was completely written as almost a negative rights, that the government can't take away our rights. That's really the heart and soul of what our Constitution is. When I talk about Christian values, that comes out of the Christian tradition. Okay, it's not saying that I believe that everybody should be Christian. To the contrary, actually, because of the foundation of Christianity, which is love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and your neighbor as thyself, that we're all sinners and that we're to love our neighbor, that's amazing. Is that allows an open pluralist society so that we can all disagree, that out of that love for each other, we can have disagreements and we would go to have a rule of law. Okay, that's a separate way of thinking than, say, even Islamic society. Islamic society, when you read the book, the reason every Islamic country, and there's, 57 Islamic majority countries, they all have a punishment for leaving Islam. And 14 of them have a punishment of death for leaving Islam. Do you see how that's completely different? Right?
No,
And so what I talk about is we want to make sure we educate. I talk about a dialogue so that we can help educate people exactly what freedom means and compare that to what people would say freedom in Islam. Well, there's no such thing as a complete and total freedom in Islam, because if there was, you'd be able to leave it without any punishment. Well, now some people might not believe that, but they don't really believe in the literal interpretation of the books that are their scriptures.
I would say that there is a good, in all fairness, that there is a good chunk of people that when they hear anything critical of Islam or just the word Islam in the conversation, they kind of take off their brain hat, and that's when the mudslinging comes out.
Sure.
I would agree with you on that the discussion of cultural values needs to be discussed. We need to talk about the history of Islamism and countries. I think that's all good to put up. And to be fair though, I think that when you talk about the issues of Islam, that you're not really distinguishing, say, stringent Islamist Sharia instead of Islamic Islamist, because, in many countries, even Iran, back to 1978, that was a very, very progressive country. Turkey, till just 2 years ago, was called the Paris of the Middle East. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is a history in the Islamic world of forward, Western thinking, but I think a lot of it's been obscured. And so when people hear you talk, they what they hear is, they don't hear that you're saying, well, our culture has certain values that are different than their culture. That's not what they're hearing. They're just hearing that you're Islamophobic or you're Islamic hater. I mean, you're a guy with background in politics, so you're very well aware of how all this sounds. I mean, is this an accident on their part that you're labeled with much of this? Where they call you a bigot, or, I mean, help me understand, at least from your experience, how do you handle this issue? That was like a garbled word mess.
No, so
what you will.
I think probably the way you want to, you have to start a conversation where both people are on the same starting spot. Okay, so 3 years ago, I didn't know anything, or 4 years ago, I knew there was Islamic terrorism. I knew September 11th happened, but I didn't understand why ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram and why there were Islamic terror organizations everywhere. And so when I read the Quran, it became very clear. When I read the Bible, the New Testament, it's blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the earth. It's very, very simple and vague. The Quran is just the story of Muhammad's life and his conversation with Allah as he goes. And so every situation he's in, he's given a directive by Allah. Okay? And so when he was in Mecca, he talked in Mecca for 14 years, and he spoke of a very, what some would say, peaceful religion, that you should take care of the church for the first 10%, and then social justice, you should take care of the poor for the next 10%, and there's a way to take care of the society. Well, he was kicked out of Mecca and went to Medina, and he became a warlord where he started winning by the sword. And then he conquered a Israeli tribe, and he beheaded 640 people. And it says in the Quran, it says, I was victorious through the use of terror. And that if people offended you, and he's talking about how he won, you would strike at their neck, okay? So that is the inspiration of Islamic terrorists, right? And that's what I'm trying to point out. And I'm trying to figure out, I don't know how to have a dialogue or talk to people about this, but people need to know that that is the root cause of terrorism, is the devout followers of the book, the Quran and the Hadith and the Sunnah, which are the other scriptures. Those are the ones that we have to be concerned about. And so not all people believe in that, but there's a portion. And so the question then is, as a free society, how do we determine who believes in this and who doesn't believe in this? And that's a really difficult issue to discuss.
Yeah, and I think I think because of the time what we have, I think we'll finish on talking about immigration.
Okay.
And then we've
gone through a whole hour already.
I know. It goes so fast.
We're at 54 minutes.
Wow.
So can we go a little over an hour? Would that be fine?
You can go as long as you want. This is podcasting. So I'm cool if you're cool.
Okay. So
I'm willing to go as long. I'm enjoying it.
I think
I want to respect your time. So
okay. So let's at least finish this conversation and move into immigration. Because
Sure.
they're strongly tied. They're almost one issue, at least in the discussion here
Sure.
in the U.S. So you do understand that. That there are progressive Muslims. There are many Muslims, may passively support some of these ideas that these extreme laws that do exist in these countries. But majority of the Muslims in say Malaysia aren't violent. It's just like the majority of X religion tends not to be violent. Do you kind of understand what we're saying? That they're saying that, well, Neal Tapio, he believes that all Muslims are dangerous, and you would disagree with that statement, obviously.
Right. So let's take Malaysia. So they will, in each Islamic country, they'll have a ministry of Islamic interpretation, right? And they will determine how they're going to believe as a society. All right. So, for instance, Saudi Arabia has what's called Salafists, which are the most violent and the most inclined to have a terrorist mentality. They believe in the full implementation of Islamic law. We need to understand that. In Malaysia, they have a much lower, and that's why not everybody has the death penalty for apostasy, so that they skew towards a different area. There's cultural Muslims that really don't believe in anything, but they are just generally share the same culture.
Yeah. Just like there are people who are Jewish, Jewish,
exactly.
Secular.
Exactly.
Secular, and so there's a whole wide range of people. But I rarely talk about Muslims. If you notice, I always talk about Islam and Islamists, radical Islamic terrorism. But I am simply pointing out that their terror has something to do with Islam, and the reason when we're fighting those people, they're following that book completely. I find it quite ironic that the groups that are opposing me fight so that when we capture somebody and we put them into Guantanamo, the same groups that are opposing me are saying that we need to give them a prayer rug and a Quran. So the people that are reading that book literally, we're giving them the document that tells them how to fight and what to do when they're captured. Okay? That's weird to me. I don't know if that's weird to you, that if they believe in the literal interpretation, and that's why they're fighting, we give them a book that helps them understand what to do next, right? So all I'm saying is that we have to understand exactly what is in this book. And that's all I'm saying.
Now, I don't know if I would have to think more on it. I think my gut reaction to that is that generally you allow whatever religious group access to their sacred text. If it was like a how-to manual on terrorism, yeah, obviously you would say no. So I would.
Have you ever read the Quran?
I have not read the Quran.
And here's what I recommend, because here's what I do: is I just show people. This is when people say that they offered paradise. It's this chapter, page 110 and chapter 9. Terror, strike terror in the hearts of unbelievers, strike off their heads. That's in chapter 8. Okay, I highlighted these because it's important for people to understand that Christians are infidels and that do not take Jews or Christians as friends. Christians are infidels that say Christ. Take not unbelievers. Kill the infidels. All right, so the moderate Muslims say those are all misinterpreted, right?
Yeah, and then they only necessarily maybe apply to wartime or something like that.
Yeah, and so it's the specific line is that if they offend you. So if you're talking, like I talked to a cab driver down in Florida a while back, and I was amazed. I was asking him just some curious questions, and I started asking him, well, do you think that you should be killed for leaving Islam? And he hesitated. And I said, oh, so there's some times where you think there should be. And he says, well, if they say something negative about it. I was like, wait a minute, what? If you say something negative about Islam, you should be killed. And I didn't know what to say. And I'm thinking, wow, that's what you believe. All right? And so we have to really have a horribly frank discussion. And that's really what, when I point out the graph in Egypt, there's 95 million people. Estimates from Pew Research suggest that probably 2/3 of them believe that you should be killed for leaving Islam.
Yep.
Now, if you're married or if you're dating somebody that's a former Muslim, okay, and their father comes to town and says you need to convert back.
Yeah, but he's still, yeah.
Then you say, wait a minute, there is no freedom. Even if you leave it, there is no freedom. Here's another story. There's a very influential Muslim or former Muslim individual that works for the state government in Rapid City. And after all my research, I spent 3 years going to symposiums, talking to interestingly, people will say, I doubt if he's ever talked to a Muslim. I've had dinner probably with 30 or 40 Muslims or former Muslims in the 3-year period of time. I hosted a girl from Iran in Watertown who was sold into a child marriage when she was 13.
Her story is amazing.
Unbelievable. Her last words from her father was to restore honor to our family name. I need to see you with your head in your lap. That's how you restore family honor. Her dad was a sheikh in Iran. Okay, when you understand that this is a part, and maybe not all people believe in this, but that's a strange part of this culture that we have to understand how this works together. And all I'm doing is saying, this is what I've read so far, this is what I know so far, and I'm willing to talk to anybody about it, which is you meet people that haven't read it, so we're at a disadvantage. When I talk to people, I bring this with me because it's really real. When I say here, it says Christians are infidels and do not take infidels as friends. What does that mean? Is that just a word in a book, or is that something more serious? So some people will ignore that, but that doesn't mean it still isn't there. If a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound? Well, there's sound waves created, right? Here, it's the same thing. It's in the book.
Okay.
What do we do?
I would say that I do know that concerns about religion are something that are valid, even in the Western world. I know that it's been counseled. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons, and it's told that if you are teaching someone that is LDS, particularly if they're a woman and they don't have the husband's permission, or if they're just a woman in general, there's often counsel that, do not teach her, because you don't want to put her in this position where she feels that she wants to be baptized. That makes the relationship impossible for her and her family, or her and her husband. Mm-hmm. So I do know that this certain cultural values that we Americans, and though many in the Western world have, don't apply across the board to everywhere. I know that we're pulling Mormon missionaries out of Turkey right now because it's become too dangerous to have them there. Turkey, I mentioned earlier,
mess right now.
Turkey's has their own new dictator in chief, like China does, and it's a big problem. So I agree with you on the values problem. I think maybe it's because you were raised from a Lutheran minister that you take talking about the Quran, the actual book, very literally. I think maybe that's probably hurting your message a little bit, because the turnoff, what they always will go to if you bring this up, and maybe you've heard it, says, well, it says in Leviticus that if you catch someone doing X, that you gotta do Y.
That's really what Jesus Christ was all about, right?
Yeah. New Testament
Jesus
versus
Christ
Old
offered
Testament.
grace to that we no longer had to. Jesus Christ fulfilled the law. That was left in the past, and that we now are free.
Covenant.
It's the new covenant, right? So that's a history lesson of where we came. It's kind of gives you a story of what, but Jesus Christ's message is clear. Nobody should ever confuse Christ's message. His message was that we're all sinners, and that we were to love our sinner neighbor, and that we were to share the good news of Christ's coming and his salvation to people, that they no longer had to carry the burdens themselves, that his death and blood on the cross, he died for their sins and released people from their sins. Freedom in Christ, right? That's a completely different message. So I object to just things that don't make sense. When people say that Islam has nothing to do with terror, all kinds of antennae go off, because I say, no, it has to have something to do with terror, because we spent $7 trillion on it. We're fighting about 19 different organizations in every country in the world, including every state in the nation. We're fighting Islamic terrorism. And when you compare what the Ku Klux Klan did, that's an abomination. That had nothing to do. You can't find a part in Scripture where it said hang black people from trees. It's not in the New Testament, right? It says that we're all God's children and that we should love our neighbor. Okay. So, were there Christians that did some bad things? Absolutely. I had a person tell me that, Hitler killed all kinds of people. And I think he forgot that actually we went over and freed a whole civilization based on people's convictions that there's right things to do. That's what I'm talking about in creating a war. If we're going to have a war, we should identify who our enemy is. We're not fighting Hindu terrorists. We're not fighting Buddhist terrorists. We're fighting Islamic terrorists. Period. If we can't agree on that, we shouldn't go to war at all. And we should pull this back. Each person that comes back that has PTSD is costing our country $11,500. We don't have money.
Oh no! What the United States
We can't do
government
it.
has done to the vets, what the VA has done to the vets. I mean, we're gonna look back 100 years from now and just be. I'm like, what are you guys thinking?
Yeah.
It'll be like how we look at the Japanese internment camps now. We're like, what? How did you guys justify that? Yeah, I think what's happened to our vets is immoral.
I guess in summary, I know we want to get on some other issues. In summary, I just believe that you have to have very honest, frank discussions. When President Trump reads the poem about a snake, he's talking about something, and it's Islamic terrorism. He's trying to tell people that you have to understand the root cause of terror. I simply fill in the blanks where President Trump talks in 140 characters. I just share with people a little bit more of the information. And this is a very uncomfortable topic. I know it makes people uncomfortable, but we have to face it, because what's going on in Western Europe, what's going on, Germany is taking 1 million migrants a year. It's changing their culture. Now, some people might not care if their culture is gone. There's a lot of us that do believe that we are trying to reach a shining city on the hill, and that we want to aspire to something great. That we're not perfect, but our goal is to try to find the best humanity possible. And I believe that conservative values, that are a mother and a father having children in a loving home, is the best way to pass on your knowledge from one generation to the next. Not just your life skills, teaching people to get up in the morning and go to work, but also a sense of morality, how to treat other people, how to live within, with kindness and respect and faith, hope, and charity. Those are the values that we have to have for us. It's really a roadmap of how to be happy. You have to have faith that in God. You have to have a belief that you're here for a reason. You have to have a belief that if you're going through problems, you've got a friend in Jesus. And then hope that there's something to look forward to, that there's a reason we're here, that there's an eternity that we can aspire to, and that there's hope for tomorrow, that if you're going through tough times, like when I gained 30 pounds and I lost everything, and I had back surgery and back problems, I couldn't get out of bed for 5 days, that there's going to be hope in something, and then charity, that once you have everything in line, that you love. That's what love is all about, is that you love your neighbor. That's my message, is that that's the answer to so many problems. And then to try to figure out how can we use government in some limited fashion to encourage those behaviors. I call them Christian behaviors, but it comes from Christ. Faith, hope, and love. And the greatest one of these is love. That's what I look at. That's what I'm selling. People might buy it. People might not buy it. Some people might be offended by it, but I think it's worked for us. I think that's really what Trump means when you make America great again. It's to get back to that type of value system. And I think I know a lot of Mormons. I worked in Utah for a full year of my life. Absolutely enjoyed my experience. Got to know an incredibly large number of Mormons. And good people, faith people, family people. There's a system that they have worked out, that you have worked out, that places family above everything.
Yep.
Right? And that's a part of the secret. And we're just trying to destroy families. I did an interview with a South Dakota public broadcasting lady, and I was explaining to her that the optimum is to have a mother and a father and a child, and she disagreed with me. And I was like, wow, where have we come where that you just need an adult? No. A child wants a sense of belonging. You want to understand where your roots go down. You want to know your father's and your mother's heritage. That's what the Mormon Church digs into, heritage, right?
No, lots of it. I know this. I mean, I may be speaking out of cuff, but I think that this is one of those values that I think most people do believe. Even those that believe in gay marriage, they still have this sense that you need to have strong roots and strong parental figures there, and we could disagree on if that works or not with gay marriage, but I think there's a general sense that people have that they need the two parents, or at least as much as possible to have both parents in the picture.
A female and a mother and a father?
Mother and father, but you get what I'm saying, though.
Okay, let me ask you this. And I really, as a congressional candidate, I shouldn't go into this subject, but do you think you're born gay?
That is...
How do you like that for a congressional candidate?
That is a dangerous
This is
topic.
off the script and talking points.
That is a dangerous topic because it could go either way. There are some people that feel that, yes, that this is something, maybe it's genetic or it's something that happened with fetal syndrome. So there's some that feel that way, but there are others feel their choice, and there are many that feel it's somewhere in between. I'm going to answer it that, me personally, I have no idea. I mean, that's not a struggle I've had. I haven't, and it's not even a struggle that I've had, family members close to me. I know some families do have a family member or an uncle, an aunt, nephew, cousin. I don't have that, so I don't know. But
what's interesting is that I'm prepared to talk about that horrible. I mean,
that used to be
it's a
something I
challenging
remember being
topic that
asked
nobody would dare ever
frequently.
talk about, and I am completely prepared to have an hour-long conversation with anybody about that topic. And that's the challenge. That's what when I went to college, the prevailing wisdom was that there was a 10% society on campus. You know what the 10% society was?
No.
They said that 10% of all populations were gay. And so they had a 10% society.
Yeah, that's like when I went to USD not that long ago. That's what the 10% society is. It's the Gay Students Association.
All right. Now the question then is where do they get the number 10%? That went off in my mind going, that doesn't make sense. And so I started exploring that. And you know where the 10% actually comes from?
I don't.
It comes from a study that was conducted in a prison. Okay? Now, is there a chance that possibly, if you're secluded in a prison, that more people might identify
more of that behavior
as gay as opposed to not gay? Right. So when you start looking at it, it's a very, very difficult topic to discuss. But when you're creating policy as a government that is rewriting a millennium of history and tradition of a marriage between a man and a woman, you need to have people that are very, very well versed or studied on this issue. And as much time as I put into this, I haven't spent as much time on homosexuality and marriage, but I have investigated and talked a lot, and I'm ready to at the right time to help lead that conversation, because what I have found is that the loneliest people in the world, the people that need a hug more than anybody else in the world, the people that believe that they should be cared for, and they should be my heart goes out to the people that are homosexual, because they're filled with anxiety, they're filled with sadness. There's a reason, especially transsexuals right now, there's a reason why suicide rates approach 40 to 50%, right?
The amounts of mental illness and depression for people that identify as transgender is much higher than the general population.
There's a push to have sex change operations. Once they've had a sex change operation to re-identify, the suicide rate even goes higher. There's an effort to maybe even to mainstream that as not even a mental illness, but it's just a physical malady that has to be corrected. So children are having, long before they're able to make any decisions for themselves as an adult, they're being told that they might have some sort of a sex change. This is a major, major deal. One of the biggest costs of health insurance right now in the state prison are these things. And we have to have very hard and honest discussions with
Currently, the prison systems, it's been generally ruled that they do have to go forward with the
the
gender sex change
yeah.
operation.
So,
Like, do you know a percentage, or what's that run for like the medical budget?
well, I think
I didn't realize it was that big a deal.
So the process, you just have to understand. So I think the most expensive case in the prison is a sex change operation. I think it's $295,000 we spent on that last year as a budget item. I'm talking off the top of my head, so my numbers could be skewed. But so what the process of getting that mainstream starts with a lawsuit that goes towards some sort of a state institution. So maybe a prison saying you have to pay for this. And then once it's in legal statute, once you've won that, and then all of a sudden you have all other government officials or government positions have to pay for that. And then from there, that then becomes pushed onto private health insurance, that you can't discriminate. There's already a number for this in the coding, and that you can't discriminate based on this. And so all of a sudden, you get these type of surgeries or these type of diagnoses pushed through. We have to be very careful with that. One of the things that I saw, my nephew was one of the greatest kids. I used to play baseball with him when he was 3 years old, and he could hit the ball further than Kirby Puckett. He moved to Minneapolis, and he had a lot of energy. And he was constrained, and all of a sudden, he was placed on Ritalin. And I started asking questions. Well, how many kids are on these type of ADHD type of drugs? Well, it turns out that they were diagnosing almost everybody with that. We can't allow this culture of drugs, and we're going to talk about drugs too today, but we can't allow this idea that everybody has a malady and that it has to be fixed with some sort of chemical issue. Or, you know what? We got to get back to the roots, and we have to face these problems head on.
Okay, so we're 15 minutes over, so I guess I think we gave some free softballs for Dakota Free Press to play with.
They can do what they want. They have their thing, we have ours.
Who's Dakota Free Press?
I
That's Corey Heidelberg's blog.
I'm gonna say Aberdeen is where he's out of.
Aberdeen.
Aberdeen. It's like it's like a SD politics blog.
It's the Democrats in South Dakota's answer to South Dakota War College.
Oh, okay.
The big two for each side is one is War College, one is Dakota Free Press.
Okay, all right.
I think that'd be a pretty fair summary.
I think I've heard of him. Does he go by Hindenburger or just Heidelberger? Hindenburg? Isn't that a lot of hot air and blew up over? No, that's not.
He's a fan of yours. He is a fan. Yeah, the amount of articles that he had for April alone.
He does. He's
just
somewhat.
ridiculous.
I was just kidding. I know who he is. He's somewhat obsessed with me.
A little bit. I would say a little bit, but in all fairness, he's often using you as an example for some subject. So it's not always directly about you. He's just using you in a prop in an article.
Okay, sure.
So, but yeah, you are.
You had me. I was just like, really?
No, I was setting up the joke. I was setting up the Hindenburg. I kind of look at him as a Hindenburger, but
you're doing a bit.
I was doing a bit. You were
and
you were
I
a prop.
bought it.
No, it was good. It was nice.
I have nothing against Corey. Corey's fine. Like you said, he's doing his own thing. We're doing ours. Plenty of room for everyone.
No, I think you guys are going to do good. Do well.
Yeah,
this is very interesting.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for the conversation. I guess the last question I would have is, so but close to earlier, I talked that Daily Beast article that was alleging that you have an anti-Muslim shtick and that you do that shtick like LeBron James, which is so weird. That politicians do that so that they can get political points. So from what I'm saying is you're interested in talking about hard subjects, and that comes from a sincere point of view. That isn't that you're trying to drum up Republican points.
Well, I think the reason I entered politics is because nobody wants to talk about the tough issues. And I am not afraid. I make my living cold call sales, which is the most difficult way to make a living, where I get told no over and over again.
Most people would rather die than cold call.
Exactly. And I became not just good at it, but I'm the best in my industry and the best in my industry around the world. And so I actually enjoy the verbal jousting or the thought-provoking part of conversation. So that's what, I am not afraid of any subject. And if I don't know something, I'm willing to say, hey, I don't know. I talk about this issue because nobody else dares to. I'm willing to talk about gay marriage or transsexual because nobody else dares to, and maybe not in a way that I think I am capable of doing it. I believe that I'm a pretty thoughtful person. I'm a pretty reasonable person. The Argus leader labeled me as a yeller. It is so rare that I yell. I mean, you've seen me now twice. It's just not my personality.
No.
I literally get along with everybody. But I'm willing to stand up for what I believe. And if something doesn't make sense, I'm willing to call people on it, and that creates a confrontation. And what I found in my life and my business is that when I have a confrontation, this is what makes you good at cold call sales, is that if you can get a confrontation where you get people's dander up a little bit or a little bit of frustration, you can make breakthroughs because people are listening. You're married? Are you married?
No, I am.
Maybe I would suggest sometimes having a fight is the next day is actually a good day.
You got to talk about the tough stuff, or it just festers.
Yeah, if it festers over and over, you have a collision, you resolve it, and then you go on.
Oh, not in my family. It's like conflict. No, I'd rather do anything else.
You don't like conflict.
No, we're softies. We're pushovers.
So I make my living in conflict. All right. With that said, I believe that President Trump, that's why I identify with President Trump, is that he makes his living in conflict. He's willing to pick a fight with Rosie O'Donnell. He's willing to call Ted Cruz Lion Ted, Little Marco. He's willing to have these conflicts.
Rocket Man.
Or Little Rocket Man. But what happens is that you keep that dialogue going, and if somebody is offended, all of a sudden that's an opportunity to make amends. And it's amazing. People would never have... My best customers have told me, I never want to see you ever again. Get the H out of here. You are a low-life son of a gun. And a week later, they're writing me a check for $20,000. And they're apologizing to me, and they say, wow, you're persistent. And I really give you credit for that. And I said, you know what? We had bad days. Everybody has a bad day. And because of that, I don't hold grudges. I've had fights with, well, half of the people up in Pier didn't talk to me for days, right? That's all right. We just had a disagreement. The next day, everything is good. A little bit about me is that I like to talk to everybody about everything. And when I was out in Washington, D.C., one of the people that I would have dinner with quite frequently, at the end of the session, Senate session, you'd be going late into the night, and it'd be, midnight or whatever. So you'd go down to the Senate cafeteria and have a little meal. And so you'd eat with all kinds of interesting people. I had dinner with Senator Daschle several times, or Senator Lott, or whoever. But Senator Wellstone was one of the most enjoyable people to have a conversation with. Do you remember Senator Wellstone from Minnesota? He was willing to talk about any question that you dared ask him. If you said, tell me exactly how you think this works, where you can give everybody everything, and it's not going to create a disincentive for them to actually produce themselves. And we would have an hour-long conversation about that. And you'd have this banter back and forth. And that's really how you would learn from each other. And so
that's a good example, because Wellstone really did speak to, like, I lived in Minnesota for 7 years, and he was an icon to the working class there, and kind of like you're talking about with the blue collar people that respect Trump, that same group that feels marginalized, stuff like that. He was somebody who really spoke to that demographic. He's still sainted over there amongst them. If you get into a conversation with people about Wellstone, it's just just glowing even years later, even the people that disagreed with him.
Yeah, and that's That's the part of government that I aspire to be a part of. I was amazed that I went up to Pierre to talk about very tough issues, and nobody wanted to have a conversation. It was a strange thing. I'd say, well, let's go out to eat. We can have an hour-long conversation. You'd go out to eat with somebody, and they would want to change the subject. To solve big problems, you have to have an intellectual curiosity and to be able to dive into problems and then learn, and then you go home and you go to bed and you wake up at 2 a.m. and your mind is going 1,000 miles an hour. That's how you solve problems, but you have to kind of get that started, right? That's how those conversations with Wellstone would happen. You can do business with people like Paul Wellstone. You could be this far apart, but if you could have that. Senator Daschle, on the other hand, the reason I was involved in the campaign against him is that he would say one thing in Washington, D.C., a different thing in South Dakota, and you would ask him and he would basically tell you what you want to hear. No, you got to talk from the heart. You got to tell people what you believe, and then you defend it. I just tell people what I believe, and then I wait for the stage to get big enough so that I can defend it. I promise you, at the right time, I will share everything I know about this, and I'll offer a solution that will work. But I'm not there yet. I mean, there's things to talk about.
So this is a good place to end. So if you are blessed with the success and do get the nomination, and then from the nomination get elected to Congress, where you talked about this at the forum. I mean, are you planning to be as open as you are, say, here in the studio with us still? And then how are you going to prevent yourself from becoming one of the swamp creatures?
Yeah, so the last question first is that I am who I am. I mean, anybody that has known me, including Senator Pressler, I quit Senator Pressler's office because I was frustrated with the bureaucracy. I predicted that he would lose the next election because he wasn't relating to the people. And it was a frustration.
I mean, he was in office, 22 years?
Quite a long time, yeah. And
I mean, he had a pretty good run.
Yeah, what happens is you kind of lose touch with just the people, right?
You saw that with Daschle, too. I mean, yeah, they just drift.
And so that's the... but all along, I've always told people what I believed, and it's not always worked out well for me. Career-wise or whatever, I wanted to work in government when I was 22 because I thought that we should try to change things in a more drastic fashion for conservative values, and that's not the system that was a part of it. And so I went out of it, and then I tried to get involved in Senator Thune's office. Or when he was running. I announced that I was going, this is a little known fact, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I announced that I was going to run for the U.S. Senate before Thune announced to run for Tom Daschle.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so I started taking ads out around the state. I took out probably $5,000 worth of ads in different areas, and I picked fights with Senator Daschle, and I tried to point out that he's living in a $3 million home in D.C., and he's driving around in a 1978 Oldsmobile. And
his wife is the wealthiest lobbyist.
She is a lobbyist.
Was the wealthiest lobbyist in all of Washington.
That's right.
And, yeah.
And that he said that he was honored by the NARAL for being the champion for pro-choice, and the Presentation Sisters would write letters to all the people saying that he was the biggest pro-life.
That is a pretty good juxtaposition.
So
actually.
I talked about that. And I thought, well, John Thune, if he did get in the race, he shouldn't be talking about negative stuff. Somebody else should. All right. As a result of that, some Democrats turned my name into a male porn website for the next 5 years of my life.
Ooh.
Okay?
And
so whenever anybody typed in nealtapio.com, it went to the action shot.
Oh boy.
And
Are you kidding?
yeah, no,
That's
serious.
That's super low.
And so what
You got
that does,
Santorumed? I mean,
what that does is it builds.
That would
up,
be then before Santorum. So Santorum would have
yeah, I
been
was gonna say,
Tapio.
you beat him to that. That. I'm sorry, but I'm just like it's one thing for when they're like elected public figure, but you were just running in a primary and they did that.
Yeah, and but that's so. I guess that tells you. I just have nuclear fuel rods of energy that I just stand up for what I believe, and if you want to hit me, if Daily Kos wants to hit me, or right now Daily Beast or whoever, hey, you know what? I've been down and drugged through all kinds of stuff. You're not going to change who I am. I just stand and I fight. I defend my values, and I believe in this time. See, I never thought that I could get elected in office because I was too strongly opinionated that I wanted to fight for my ideas. But President Trump and the Trump effect is that people are listening right now, and they want people, even if they disagree with you, they want people just to look them in the eye and tell them the truth. This is who I am, this is what I believe, and just stand there and defend it. That's what President Trump does every day. He's getting hit by the Russian collusion story, the Democrats, the media, pop culture, Saturday Night Live. But he's also getting hit by FBI, the deep state, and the Republicans, the mainstream establishment Republicans. He's world leaders.
Yeah,
but
you're like New England establishment Republican. That the Republican Party is a big tent party with a lot of different like subgroups, and I think we talked about that in our first episode a bunch. But the establishment one of the like Northeast region is really against him. I mean,
and the
Ironic because he comes from New York.
yeah.
And the intervention, the globalist intervention, the idea that we can, topple a regime and then put in some sort of, like what they're talking about in Syria is quite amazing.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that you're going to remove Assad and then what? Who's going to take over? We've already learned our lesson in Libya and in Iraq.
Well, you would hope so.
But that's what the war drums. Howard Dean, the pacifist, wants to go to war. Nancy Pelosi, John McCain, Lindsey Graham.
They all authorized the Iraq
Trump.
invasion. Every one of them voted for it.
That's right. And I was for it. But I bought into the idea that you could bring peace or that bring freedom to a people. You can't. You have to fight for your own freedom. That's what the lessons of all this past 20 or 30 years have taught us, is that you have to fight your own battles. You have to win your own battles. And us coming in there and dropping bombs at 30,000 feet doesn't help. And I guess my thought is that I would like to go to Washington and I would like to be a leader to talk about tough issues. And the more interviews I get to do with podcasts like yours, the more, sometime we might be able to get this into an hour-long interview as opposed to a 2-hour-long interview. But you get better and better and better at talking about very controversial stuff. And when you do, you lead on that issue. What happens with politicians is they dodge every issue and they never lead on any issues. And that's how you get trillion-dollar deficits on a $4 trillion budget, $21 trillion in debt. There's no difference between a Republican and Democrat right now.
Am I allowed to throw a question in, Pete? Can I? Okay. I feel like you're just...
I consider you pretty much
So
co-host.
what's your take on this most recent budget that, like you said, I'm sitting here, I'm an old like fiscal conservative, and I just look at this budget we passed, and I'm like... So, what was the difference between Republicans and Democrats in Congress right now?
Yeah. So, all right. So, look at it if you look at everything in life as a negotiation. Imagine that this is a huge negotiation, and then you have to have a drop dead date. You have to pass it by this date, okay? Or else what? You shut the government down.
Right.
Now, imagine if your side says that we're never going to shut the government down, okay? So then the goal for the other side is just to push it to the end and get to the very last day and say, well, I guess we got to make a decision. And so what happens? It's called a Christmas tree. You just load up the Christmas tree and you get it passed.
Yeah.
So the better answer is to say, no, We're going to shut the government down, and we're going to have tough discussions, we're going to have tough decisions, and we're going to defend our positions. Now, in my race, do you think Dusty Johnson is going to be able to defend that? Do you think Chantel Krebs is? Even John Thune or Mike Rounds? Will they be able to stand and defend those positions? No, they're career politicians. They don't want controversy. They don't. They're controlled by fear. Because at one time, Newt Gingrich closed down the government, and remarkably, they won more seats in the next legislation or the next
I really feel
season.
like historically people have taken some of the wrong lessons from that.
But that's the lessons they've taken, that we're never going to shut the government down. I look at it as saying, I am deathly scared. The reason I'm running is we have a $1 trillion deficit on a $4 trillion budget.
Yep.
My friends, my relatives and my relatives' friends have invented amazing products that are national or worldwide products, and they're afraid to invest their own money in their own businesses right now because they don't believe in the system. Okay? When you break down the system where people stop investing in it and stop believing in it, the whole thing, the music ends, and there's not enough chairs. That's my fear. The reason I'm running is that we have to have tough decisions, and we have to make tough decisions, or else they're going to be made for us. And when they're made for us, it's going to be ugly.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to call it. Unfortunately, we found out today that Neal Tapio is a talker. That's not good in a room full of talkers. I appreciate anyone that took the time to listen. I appreciate State Senator Neal Tapio's time. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much, guys. Good luck to you.
I'd like to thank you. I will confess I have criticized you on my website, thesioempire.com, in the past.
Okay.
But I have found you extremely transparent and forthright. We're not going to agree on everything, but really enjoyed talking with you tonight, and just really impressed with how you've presented yourself, and thank you very much for coming. It was a pleasure to have you here and to talk. Like you said, that's what I like about podcasting, is it's long format. I like to get into the complexity of bigger ishes, and this was really nice.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I enjoyed every minute of it.
All right, so you want to give a quick shout out for your Facebook and whatnot?
Yeah, go ahead and social media websites.
All right, yeah. So everything is really, I try to put everything on Facebook of consequence. So just Neal Tapio on Facebook, but www.nealtapio.com is where we kind of push the video, and so yeah, 3 weeks left before this election.
Exciting. Yeah. June 5th. So if you live in South Dakota, or you have relatives that live in South Dakota, tell them to make sure they're registered.
And they're Republican.
Yeah, well, if they want to vote for Tapio, they have to be Republican, but get registered and try to vote. The primary vote is on June 5th. So...
All right, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap.
Thank you for listening. The Happy Warrior Podcast, hosted by Peter Von Pischke, produced by Robert Mailing, a production of the Sioux Empire Podcast Network. Learn more at happy-warrior.net.
A production of thesioempire.com.